Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, classmates. Today we will discuss the topic about critical thinking. Together with me, Isabel Jane Simon and yours truly, Fabrics G and Arce. But before we proceed to the formal discussion for this afternoon, let us define first or guide questions about critical thinking. So the first one is what is critical thinking? The second one is what is the purpose of critical thinking in argumentation and debate? Third, what are the ways in constructing an argument? Fourth, what are the parts of an argument? Fifth, what are the strategies in analyzing arguments? What are the common fallacies in involving arguments? And lastly, what are the cross-examination and points of information? And now let us define first our guide question, which is what is critical thinking? Critical thinking allows people to analyze, criticize, and advocate ideas, to reason inductively and deductively, and to reach factual judgment or conclusion based on the sound inferences drawn from ambiguous statement of knowledge or belief. So basically, critical thinking is the intellectual discipline process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated observation or the action. And it is a reasoning guide to brief the action. Let us proceed now to the second question. What is the purpose of critical thinking? So basically, the purpose of critical thinking is to ensure that people are able to think and rationally about what to do or what to believe. As an explanation, critical thinking is the core academic skills that teaches us to reflect and question the knowledge and information. At this moment, let us discuss deconstructing an argument. Primarily, argument is to use change people points of view or persuasion, inquiry, and conviction. Constructing argument has 5 parts. The first part is the title, wherein it introduces the topic of discussion to the audience, and also it generates reader interest in the argument. For example, clean campus or cleaning up campus with recycled bins or reducing rubbish or recycling on campus. Note, use and active verbs in the title. Second is the introduction. Acquaints the reader with the topic and purpose of the paper, generate the audience interest in the topic, or offers a plan for ensuring the argument. The third one is the thesis statement. The thesis statement should guide your reader through your argument. The thesis statement is generally located in the introduction of the paper. A thesis statement may also be located within the body or part or in the conclusion, depending on the purpose of the argument of the paper. Fourth is the body. Body build up the claims made in the introductory paragraphs. It is organized the use of topic sentences that illustrate the main idea of each paragraph, offering a brief explanation of the history or recent development of your topic within the early body paragraphs can help the audience to become familiarized with your topic and the complexity of the issue. And lastly, the conclusion. Conclusion should be re-emphasize the main points made in your paper. You may also choose to reiterate a call to action or speculate on the future of your topic when it is appropriate, and avoid raising new claims in your conclusion. All these 5 parts in constructing the arguments, the title, introduction, thesis statement, body, and conclusion is the most essential in order to be organized and have a strong arguments. The 7C, first, consider the situation. Second, clarify your thinking. Third, construct your claim. Fourth, collect evidence. Fifth, consider the key objection. 6, craft your arguments. And lastly, confirm your main points. To further discuss the guide question, now let us proceed to the parts of the argument. So, the 3 parts of the arguments are claim, reason, and evidence, which claim defined as the statement of the author's opinion on a debatable topic. For the second one, the reason defined as the argumentative statement that supports the main claim, showing the thinking behind it. Lastly, the most important one, which is the evidence, which defined as the specific facts that supports the author's reason. To fully understand in a specific way the parts of the argument, so the claim is what the author is arguing, and the reason why the author argues that claim, and lastly the evidence, which is the facts or the reason that supports that claim. So basically, the parts of the argument. So, to fully understand, let us proceed to the topic analyzing the arguments. Has the important role in determining what are the arguer means. So, consecutively, numbering the arguments and identifying the arguments or main claim, and diagramming the arguments and critiquing the arguments. So, there are three parts of analyzing the argument. First is the persuasion or persuade, where the author is trying to convince the reader that a claim is true by giving reasons or evidences. For the second one, which is the claim, it is defined that the claim of an argument is the point of the argument. When an author makes an argument, it is the claim that the author is trying to persuade the reader to accept the truth or the truth. So lastly, the analysis, which refer to evaluate an argument you need to analyze. When you analyze an argument, you need to break it down into parts and examine them by themselves and in relation to the other parts of the argument. So to fully understand the analysis of the argument, here are the steps in analyzing the argument. First is to identify the claim. Second, identify the reason or evidence. Third, think critically and skeptically. And lastly, ask yourself in a reason or evidence or support that claim. Because the point of analysis will analyze the logic of the author's case by evaluating both the use of evidence and the logical connections as what the evidence or conclusion, assumption, and ramification. The key concept of analyzing is the argument is to assess the ability to evaluate the argument. This is the opportunity to demonstrate the critical thinking, analytically abilities, and the clarity which present the ideas.
So this time, I'm going to discuss about strategies in analyzing arguments, common logical fallacies, and cross-examination. Let's have the strategies in analyzing arguments first. When you analyze an argument, you evaluate someone else's argument. The task presents a brief passage in which the author makes a case for a course of action or interprets events by presenting claims and supporting evidence. Your job will be to examine the claims made and critically assess the logic of the author's position. You will analyze the logic of the author's case by evaluating both the use of evidence and the logical connections. In reading the author's argument, consider the following. These are the points of analysis. 1 is what evidence is given. There are 3 categories of evidence that are essential to gain the audience's confidence in the author's assertions. These categories are fact, judgment, and testimony. 2, what conclusions are made. This is the endpoint reached by a line of reasoning. 3, what assumptions, likely not stated, are made. Assumptions are a belief often unstated or unexamined, and this is the author's point that holds in order to make a particular position. 4, what ramifications, perhaps not stated again, would necessarily follow from the author's argument. This is when you examine the aftermath. Also, evaluate the reasoning and structure of the argument. Look for transition words and phrases to follow, and the author's logical connections such as however, thus, therefore, evidently, hence, and in conclusion. Then, evaluate the following. What leaps are being made from one point of logic to another, and are classic logical flaws evident? You will not need to address classic logical flaws by their Latin names, but you should be able to recognize and refute common logical errors. A review of common logical flaws will be helpful in preparation for analyzing arguments, which leads us to our next topic, which is common fallacies involving argument. We have here ad hominem or at the person fallacy. This is rejecting someone's argument by attacking the person rather than evaluating the argument on its merits. This is very commonly observed in social media, to be honest, especially with Filipinos who have disparaging opinions about certain topics, or when someone they don't necessarily agree with speak out something in their posts, and sometimes they lead into an argument where the point gets lost and the argument becomes about them instead. We also have the who are you to talk, or you too, or to quote fallacy. This is rejecting an argument because the person advancing it fails to practice what he or she preaches. This is very self-explanatory, I believe. Then we have appeal to ignorance. The arguer asserts that a claim must be true because no one has proven it false, or vice versa. Naturally, we are all ignorant of many things, but it is cheap and manipulative to allow this unfortunate aspect of the human condition to do most of our heavy lifting in an argument. And then we also have the red herring fallacy. This is when an arguer tries to sidetrack his or her audience by raising an irrelevant issue and then claims that the original issue has effectively been settled by the irrelevant diversion. This is basically redirecting the argument to favor the stand of the arguer. And then last but not the least, appeal to emotion. Example, pity or affection. This is when an arguer attempts to evoke feelings of pity or compassion when such feelings are not logically relevant to the arguer's conclusion. In short, to put it blatantly in our language, it's called a victim. Now we go to our next topic, which is cross-examination. This is a period of the time between speeches where opponents ask each other questions to clarify and better understand each other's case. This time, you actually engage with your opponent. And during this time, you are given the opportunity to demonstrate confidence and credibility that will allow you to become a more persuasive speaker and help you win speaker points. So here we are going to explore the do's and don'ts of questioning in cross-examination and the do's and don'ts of answering when being cross-examined. So let's have the do's of questioning in cross-examination first. 1. Keep your questions argumentative. 2. Ask relatively short questions. This keeps questions focused on relevant material in the debate as well as avoid broad questions that allow your opponents to give vague answers that don't give you any advantage. 3. Make sure you fully understand arguments before moving on. 4th, reference speeches in your questions. And lastly, keep your eyes on the judge. Now let's go to the don'ts with questioning in cross-examination. Number 1, do not start questions with "do you agree" or "are you aware?" Number 2, do not re-explain things that are already clear. This wastes time for both you and your opponents. Number 3, do not look at your opponent when asking questions. You should always keep your eyes on the judge. So let's have the do's of answering when being cross-examined. Number 1, keep your answers short and sweet. Be specific to the question and don't give them any more information than they need. 2, reference authors. Not only will this help you answer questions effectively, but this also shows that the judge that you know your speech inside and out, which boosts your speaker points. 3, stare at the judge for attention. Now, let's go to the don'ts when answering in cross-examination. 1, do not answer irrelevant questions. You can ask your opponents why a question is relevant before declining to answer. 2, do not interrupt your partner if you're answering a question. 3, do not be afraid to admit that you don't know something. If your opponent asks you something that both you and your partner don't know, it's better to admit that you don't know than to lie about it. And you can always argue later that it's not an important element of your debate anyways. So, in summary, there are elements that experts agree are essential for critical thinking, such as being able to think independently, clear, and rationally. It involves the ability to reflect on an idea or problem, apply reason, and make logical connections between ideas. And being able to use critical thinking means being able to identify, construct, and evaluate arguments, detect inconsistencies and common mistakes in reasoning, solve problems systematically, identify the relevance and importance of ideas. So in conclusion, debating instead of arguing can help you diffuse a rapidly escalating situation. Debating helps you to develop essential critical thinking skills, and which is the ability to make reasoned and well thought out arguments, in addition to questioning the evidence behind a particular stance or conclusion. So that would be all for our lesson today. I hope that you have learned a lot about the critical thinking and that you will use and develop it, especially when you are dealing with a lot of people every day. That's all. God bless and stay safe.